Harald Fairhair supposedly united Norway, yet the earliest records never describe the sweeping national conquest celebrated by later tradition. That absence does not erase Harald, but it changes the scale of the question immediately. Instead of watching a kingdom appear in one campaign, we must examine how scattered evidence became a founding story. The familiar account survives most fully in Icelandic works, written roughly 3 centuries after Harald's presumed lifetime. Those narratives offer battles, rivals, marriages, and a vow involving uncut hair. Nearer evidence presents a narrower figure moving within Western Scandinavian politics during the late 9th century. The Skaldic poem Haraldsquæði, preserved through later manuscripts, associates a ruler named Harald with a victory at Hafrsfjord. Poetry could retain early material, but transmission, performance, and courtly praise complicate every historical inference. Even the poem's herald cannot automatically carry the complete biography assembled by medieval historians. Hafrsfjord lies near modern Stavanger, beside waterways connecting farms, islands, and the North Sea. Later tradition turned fighting there into the decisive moment when Norway became one realm. Archaeology confirms prosperous communities and powerful centers around southwestern Norway, not a single documented national takeover. The battlefield itself has not supplied evidence capable of reconstructing commanders, numbers, or a precise political settlement. What probably changed was control over routes, tribute, and alliances along a strategically valuable coast. Such power could be formidable without reaching every valley later enclosed by Norway's borders. The very word Norway likely referred first to a northward maritime route rather than a consolidated state. Sailing that route meant navigating sheltered channels, exposed crossings, seasonal winds, and many local jurisdictions. A ruler dominating parts of this corridor could appear larger from abroad than from inland communities. Political authority also depended upon households able to provision ships, gather crews, and sustain armed followings. Farmers, fishers, craftspeople, dependents, and enslaved laborers carried costs hidden behind royal victory poetry. Harald's possible ascendancy therefore concerned relationships, not merely territory colored on a modern map. Local leaders might submit, bargain, marry into alliances, pay tribute, or resist when royal pressure weakened. No surviving administrative archive shows Harald appointing officials throughout a unified Norwegian kingdom. Nor do contemporary coins, laws, or charters reveal one standardized government under his command. This documentary gap matters because later unification stories assume institutions that developed gradually. Western European writers provide another fragment, though identifying their Scandinavian rulers remains difficult. The Frankish annals mention a Danish king named Horik and other northern actors, but not Harald's national conquest. Around 890, the traveler Othere described his homeland to King Alfred's court in England. Othere located himself in Hålogaland and distinguished his region from lands farther south. His account reveals long-distance travel, tribute among Sami communities, whaling, farming, and coastal exchange. It does not depict a newly unified Norway governed visibly from Harald's court. Silence alone proves little, since Othere was explaining geography and resources rather than compiling royal history. Hålogaland's northern networks differed from the political world surrounding Hafrsfjord by enormous distances. Mountain ranges, fjords, and winter conditions made continuous enforcement expensive. Ships linked coasts efficiently, but maritime speed did not guarantee permanent control ashore. Later kings repeatedly struggled to turn coastal influence into dependable taxation and obedience. That difficulty cautions against granting an earlier ruler effortless command over the whole peninsula. Harald's descendants present a second problem because medieval genealogies served later dynastic claims. Norwegian kings benefited from tracing legitimacy back to an illustrious founder. Genealogy could preserve genuine relationships while also simplifying rival lines and disputed successions. The 10th century rulers, called sons of Harald, may not all have shared one father. Historians consequently separate plausible kinship from the expansive family tree offered by sagas. Even Harald's epithet Fairhair reaches us through later tradition rather than secure contemporary usage. The Hair Vow transforms political ambition into a personal pledge with a satisfying visible conclusion. According to the story, Harald refused to cut or comb his hair until he ruled all Norway. No near-contemporary witness records that vow, and its literary neatness should discourage literal acceptance. It supplies a storyteller with anticipation, fulfillment, and the physical naming of a dynasty's founder. The motif also turns complicated coalition building into one man's unwavering purpose. Medieval authors were not simply fabricating randomly. They organized inherited material for their own audiences. Theodoric the monk, writing in the late 12th century, treated Norwegian royal history within a Christian framework. Agrip, another late 12th century work, compressed royal succession into a concise narrative. Snorri Sturluson's 13th century Heimskringla created the richest and most influential version of Harald's rise. Snorri wrote in Iceland amid aristocratic politics, inherited poetry, oral traditions, and written histories. His account names regional opponents and sequences campaigns with confidence unavailable to modern verification. Where Skaldic verses appear, they may provide older kernels without validating every surrounding prose episode. Quotation inside a later composition must be judged by language, meter, transmission, and narrative placement. One famous consequence of Harald's victories supposedly drove opponents westward toward Iceland and other islands. Icelandic settlements accelerated from the late 800s into the early 900s. Settlers arrived from Scandinavia and from Norse communities around Britain and Ireland. Genetic, linguistic, and literary evidence shows mixed origins, including women with ancestry from the British Isles. A single Norwegian king cannot explain this broad movement by himself. Land availability, family strategy, conflict, commerce, and existing Western routes all contributed. Later Icelanders nevertheless had reasons to contrast ancestral independence with royal oppression in Norway. Harald became a convenient force pushing freedom-seeking families across the sea. That narrative expressed Icelandic political memory as much as 9th century migration mechanics. Burial evidence within Norway further resists a clean before and after transformation under one monarch. Elite graves, ship burials, imported goods, and monumental mounds reveal several wealthy regional power bases. Osberg predates Harald's presumed reign and already displays extraordinary resources around the Oslofjord. Gokstad, probably built late in the 9th century, demonstrates maritime capacity and elite authority in Vestfold. Neither ship identifies Harald, and neither burial certifies a national royal administration. They instead show a competitive world capable of producing rulers with substantial regional reach. Control of such vessels required timber selection, iron fastenings, rope, sailcloth, food stores, and trained crews. Authority rested on mobilizing these resources repeatedly, not winning one legendary battle. Over generations, successful dynasties could convert temporary followings into more durable royal institutions. Christianization later provided kings with churches, bishops, writing, and ideological support for centralized rule. Coinage, lawmaking, royal estates, and assemblies became more visible under rulers after Harald. Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson faced resistance that exposes how incomplete earlier consolidation remained. Even 11th century kings negotiated with regional elites rather than commanding a uniform nation-state. The term unification therefore compresses a long, reversible process into a single heroic reign. Yet dismissing Harald entirely would create a different distortion. Early praise poetry and persistent dynastic memory suggest an important ruler associated with Western Norway. Hafrsfjord may indeed mark a major victory that expanded his dominance over coastal competitors. His reputation could have supplied later kings with a prestigious ancestral starting point. What remains unsupported is the later map-size claim of complete and lasting sovereignty. The legend grew because medieval Norway needed a beginning proportionate to its mature monarchy. Founders make institutions appear intentional, continuous, and inherited rather than contested and recently assembled. Royal historians could place disorder before Harald and legitimate succession after him. Icelandic writers could simultaneously remember him as conqueror and explain their ancestors' departure. Modern nationalism then gave the medieval synthesis another purpose during Norway's search for historical continuity. Paintings, monuments, schoolbooks, and public anniversaries fixed Hafrsfjord as a national birth scene. Those commemorations reveal the power of the story, not fresh evidence for the 9th century. The strongest reconstruction leaves several scales of authority visible at once. Harald was probably a successful war leader whose influence centered on parts of western and southwestern Norway. Local rulers, assemblies, households, and northern networks continued to shape life beyond any simple royal frontier. Later descendants and historians enlarged his victories into the moment one people acquired one kingdom. The precise reach of Harald's power remains unknown because no contemporary territorial record survives. Future securely dated inscriptions or settlement evidence might sharpen that boundary, though none currently resolves it. Hafrsfjord can still matter without serving as a magical starting line for a modern state. Its remembered victor belongs to Norway's political formation, but he did not complete that formation alone. Harald Fairhair's greatest unification was ultimately achieved in retrospective storytelling, where centuries of struggle became one king's legendary triumph.